Good morning. Good to see you here. If we haven't met, my name's Chris, and it is good to be with you. If you are a guest, you may not know, or if you've been out for a couple weeks, we have been in a series over this past month that we're calling How to Neighbor. And it's interesting, when it comes to matters of faith, we can tend to complicate things sometimes, can't we? And sometimes maybe other people have complicated things, and to where it's hard to know, like if we were to whittle it down to something simple, what would we as Christ followers, or those of you who are thinking about following Christ, say it's all about? Well, thankfully, some folks asked Jesus that very question, and listen to how he responded. He said this in Mark chapter 12. You know, the most important, and he's referring to all of the commands, the most important is this: Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, and with all of your mind, and with all of your strength. And the second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And there is no other command greater than these. So we have been exploring together not only who our neighbors are, but how is it that we as God's family love our neighbors well. And if you search the scriptures and you begin to see some themes, a few people that God identifies as these people are really important to me, I want to make sure you, as my family, prioritize them and pour out the love that I've poured into you onto them. And we see one group of people maybe rises above the rest, and it's the poor. We see that from Genesis to Revelation. There are over 2,000 scriptures on poverty and justice. And we're actually going to go through every single one of those verses this morning. I'm just kidding. We're not really going to go through it. Some of you guests are like, oh, sweet mother, how can I leave quickly and subtly? No, we're not going to go through all of those verses, but it is interesting. And this is one of those areas that when we started our church about 5 years ago, I wanted to make sure that we loved the poor well. And so it was the very first year right after we had started our church, right around the fall, right around Thanksgiving. And we thought we would throw this big feast for people in our community that could benefit from a meal. Maybe wouldn't have a Thanksgiving meal, or maybe not a meal at all. We wanted to love the poor really well. So we got in touch with a local school, which was down from our old church office, Wolfever Elementary. We got a hold of their guidance counselor, who connected us with some families in their community who they identified had some significant needs, and we could invite them personally. So we did that. We sent letters out to those families. We got a hold of the Collegeville Police Department, who knew some shut-ins and some people in the community that would benefit and be blessed by a feast like this. And they actually said they would even transport them to our church office. We put flyers out around the neighborhood where we were, and we were excited. We had around a dozen turkeys, about half dozen hams. We had sides and desserts coming out of our ears and noses. We even dressed up, to serve this food. We were so excited, and we were all there, prayed up, ready to go. And we were expecting somewhere between around 100 and 150 people or so. So long tables, flowers, the works. And have you ever thrown a party for people that didn't end up coming to the party that you threw? That was a little bit like our experience. We had one family that came. Uno family. And it was one of many experiences that I've had where I realized I have no idea what I'm doing here. While our heart was good and we wanted to love and to help the poor, what we had missed is that we really needed to first actually get to know those who had needs if we were going to help the poor. In fact, we wanted to do more than just help the poor. We wanted to empower them to go beyond their immediate needs and to see that God builds up and restores them to a place of honor and dignity. And so in order to do this, we needed to, and even now, we need to understand as we explore this, what poverty even is. Because I bet as I say poor, a lot of us are going to have some different understandings of who those people are and what poverty is. There are people I know in our church that are struggling financially, you're just paycheck to paycheck, and you feel like you can't get ahead. You're always behind. We know that there are people beyond our community here around the city who are in significant needs and are experiencing incredible brokenness and pain and suffering. Some of you have been international, and you've seen people all over the world who live in dwellings that you can't even imagine hosting your family in. I'm talking about like a sheet for a front door and a shanty or mud for walls and a bucket for a toilet. But here's what I know. Poverty, whether it's right here or on the other side of the globe, it is real. And it is all around us. And as God's family, what we're going to see this morning is that he wants us to especially make sure we pay attention to and empower these people. Jesus didn't mince any words. If you got your Bible, open them up to Matthew chapter 35. And he gathered some people together, and he wanted to make sure they understood how important these people were to him and his Father. And he began to tell a parable of what it would be like when he returns and the end of time comes. And this is what he said in verse 31 of chapter 25 of Matthew. There's going to be these two different groups of people. He's going to say, those are mine and those who aren't. And he said, when the Son of Man, this is his favorite name for himself, comes in glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. And before him will be gathered all the nations. So imagine this for a moment. And he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on the left. And then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food, just like that sweet child. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Now confused and maybe curious, those who were being welcomed into his kingdom asked, verse 37, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? And when do we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when do we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly, I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of my brothers, you did it to me. So Jesus is saying, here's how this is going to work. When you offer what you have to empower someone who has a significant need, you're actually ministering to and blessing me. We are blessing Jesus. It's like he gets up in these people who have these needs, and we love on them. And in doing that, we love on Jesus. Proverbs 19 speaks to this as well in verse 17. He says, if you help the poor, you are lending to the Lord. And so by serving those in need, we're actually serving God. And so we want to be the kind of church family that doesn't just say, hey, you know, someone should do something about that. You know, we Christians and churches are really good at that. You know, someone needs to do something, but we want to go beyond that and be a people who are known for those who prioritize, those who God prioritized. And we see people the way that God sees them. This is the church. This is the hope of the world. It's God's plan. And one of Jesus' closest friends spoke to this and wrote this in one of his letters. John said in 1 John 3:17, but if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him? Little children, let us not love in word or talk, but in deed and in truth. So God wants us not only to see needs that are around us, but then actually to act. And when it comes to these kinds of things, I haven't run into too many Christians that are like, yeah, I don't care. I don't, it doesn't bother. You know, I haven't run into many people who don't want to do something, but a lot of us, like those of us in the beginning, are like, well, we tried, or we're not sure what helping is we don't want to hurt, or we don't want to enable, or we don't know what it looks like. So what I want to do this morning is to begin a greater understanding for what first poverty is. Because if we don't understand what this is, we may end up harming more than we can actually help. There's a great book and a resource that has been instructive for us. It's called When Helping Hurts. And in this book, there were those that did a survey and asked the question, well, then what is poverty? Because we need to define that together. What does it mean to be poor? And who are those people? Now, for those in America, as we respond to that, we talk primarily of material things. And you might answer it in this way. Someone who doesn't have a home, someone who doesn't have basic necessities like food and water and health care. These are those who are impoverished. But what they began to see is there was actually a disconnect between those who are in America who define poverty and those who are actually in abject poverty and how they describe and define poverty. They actually did a study of 6,000 people of over 600 countries who are considered poor, and these are some of their responses. Listen to what they said and how they defined poverty as the truly poor. This is someone from Moldova said this: for a poor person, everything is terrible. Illness, humiliation, shame. We are cripples. We are afraid of everything. We depend on everyone. No one needs us. We're like garbage that everyone wants to get rid of. Someone else said, when I don't have any food to bring my family, I borrow, mainly from neighbors and friends. I feel ashamed standing before my children when I have nothing to help feed the family. I'm not well when I'm unemployed. It's terrible. Someone from Uganda said this: when one is poor, she has no say in public. She feels inferior. She has no food, so there is famine in her house, no clothing, and no progress in her family. Last quote: the poor have a feeling of powerlessness and an inability to make themselves heard. So we see that poverty isn't just material. Poverty is a mindset. And you can hear it in the words of these people who are actually poor. It's this feeling of humiliation, this feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. What comes from that then is birth this feeling of shame and being trapped. So it's more than just material. And so to empower those who are struggling, we need to understand not only what poverty is, but we need to know where it comes from. And here's what we know: all poverty is a result of brokenness. That's where it began. And we can trace this all the way back to the Garden of Eden, where mankind, Adam and Eve, rebelled against God's plan. And in doing this relationship between God and man was broken and distorted. And then this relationship between man and man, so Adam and Eve, you remember the first thing that happened when they sinned, they started pointing fingers, which we've been doing since. He did it, she did it, he made me do it, she made me do it. And then beyond that, we see this broken relationship between us and ourselves. This understanding of who we are and where our identity is, that we were actually created in the image of God, but now with sin, that image, it's been distorted. We see like through a broken lens. And so that sense of humiliation and powerlessness and hopelessness and shame begins to bubble to the surface, to the backdrop of this brokenness. Thankfully, we have a Messiah that rolled into the temple and unfurled this scroll that had this prophecy that Isaiah had written. And he opens it up and he reads from Luke 4, verse 18. We see the Spirit of the Lord is upon me. This is Jesus speaking, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to who? The poor. And he has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives and the recovering of sight to the blind, and set at liberty those who are oppressed, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And then just a couple verses later, we see that Jesus says, I am the fulfillment of these things. He says, I am the one who is going to bring good news to the poor. I am the one who's going to set captives free. I am the one who's going to liberate the oppressed. And here's what we need to understand and make crystal clear. Jesus saves. Jesus is the one who will heal the brokenhearted. Jesus is the one who sets us free. Can I get an amen? So that means the root problem of poverty, it's brokenness. But here's the good news. Jesus is the one who heals the brokenhearted. This is why this is significant, because when we begin these conversations, we feel like this. It's just so big. And I'm just so small. And what can I do? What can we do? And we feel this pressure to be something or someone that we are not, that Jesus never invited us to. But he says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to step in and make sure that you understand where the power comes from. And it's from Jesus. He is the power. He is the strength. He's the hero. The question is, how do we live this out practically? How do we actually take John's instruction to be those who are Christ followers, who see needs all around us, and we see needs all around us, and how do we live this out in deed, not just in word? So this morning, what I want us to do, I've got 3 quick encouragements that we can together begin to understand as we lay this foundation and we begin to lean into these things as a community, that we can understand to take these steps so that we can go beyond just helping, but we can empower. If you've got a bulletin, flip it on over. You can follow along and fill in the gaps if you want. And this is the first encouragement. Serve, don't try to save. Serve, don't try to save. It's actually insulting and dangerous to begin to think that we are the answer. We are not the answer. Turn to someone and say, you're not the answer. Turn to somebody else and say it with conviction. You're also not the answer. That's right. We are the servants, but it's Jesus who is the answer. We don't save people, we serve people. Jesus is the source. But here's the question. Well, then how does he invite us to serve? Well, there are 2 different ways. And if we take one without the other, it's going to be short-sighted. And maybe it will help the poor, but it might not actually empower them. 2 ways this morning we're talking about. One is relief, and the second is restoration. Now, what is that? Well, relief is this. We'll define it this way this morning. It is immediate, temporary help during and after a crisis. And so you may remember, if you've been with us for a while, a couple years ago, Hurricane Irma came through the Caribbean and destroyed large parts of Haiti. Well, our student ministries director, Wensley, is from Haiti originally. He's got family there, uncles and aunts and cousins, and we began to sense that God was calling us to step in and help where their 2 homes had gotten destroyed. And so we pooled our resources here. We literally sent thousands of dollars down to Haiti so that those homes could be rebuilt. This is what relief looks like. For us here in our world, it might look like someone losing a job or a single mother falling on hard time, struggling to make ends meet. And as we are aware of these needs, God might be tapping us on the shoulder and say, hey, I'm inviting you who has much to provide relief. But there's also restoration. Restoration is this. It's a long-term relationship to build wholeness. And that word wholeness is incredibly significant. This is after the world moves on, after the storm and leaves, and this is when the church sticks around. This is when we began to see people moving beyond just kind of that desperate place of brokenness, but then rebuilding to get to a point of stability. Again, if you're with us a couple weeks ago when we started this series, this is what the Good Samaritan did. When he saw that man on the side of the road, broken, bruised, and left for dead, he not only gave salve and oil and bandages for his wounds, but he put him up on his donkey. He took him to a bed and breakfast, and he said, I'll be back to pay the bill. You see, relief and restoration. Our job is to serve. It's not to save. Second encouragement is this, is relate, don't try to rescue. Those who are struggling, and I'm guessing there are people here who have been struggling or are struggling, they are not projects that we help, but they are people that we love. not projects, people. I've had the privilege over the last several months of hanging out with Matt Rogers, who has, over the last year and a half, been going to the Cleveland Emergency Shelter. And there is a group of folks that we have gotten to serve once a month. And as we've been doing that, I've been learning some things. And this past time that we went a couple weeks ago, we had fed them, and I was wiping tables after we were done serving. And the director came up to me and kind of smacked my hand. And I'm like, what are you doing? I'm trying to be Jesus to these people. You know, I was confused. And then she began to say, don't clean the tables. And I was like, well, why? She said, well, if you clean the tables, then they can't clean the tables. I said, okay, go on. So, well, here's how it works here. Everyone who has a meal here, everyone who stays here has a job here. So we see these people have value. Maybe they're down on their luck, but they can contribute. They have something to offer. So you see that those who have gone before us and are doing a way better job than we attempted understand that actually in not doing everything for someone, it will help restore dignity to someone who might be hurting. It lets you and I see people not just as a project where I'm doing all the giving, they're doing all the receiving, but we're coming together in a way that empowers. It's not what can I do for you, that's disempowering, but instead is how can I help you? One elevates, the other can oppress. And when we come in and we do something for someone, and we love to do stuff for people, there is something in us that I think is God-given that we just love to bless, we love to help, and that's a good thing. But what ends up happening sometimes is that we are the hero, and it can create a bit of a codependent relationship, right? Because then they're going to have to come back and exclusively lean on and depend on us. But when we come in and we do something with someone, well, now they're empowered. Now they are lifted up. Because remember, poverty, it's not just material, it's a mindset. We see them as someone who has value, who has something to offer and something to give. It restores dignity. It begins to catalyze forward movement. So we serve, we don't just save. We relate, we don't just try to rescue. Final encouragement is this, is to reach out, don't reach down. There's a subtle, important difference. We reach out because we care, right? We reach out because we see a brother or a sister in need, but don't reach down, which there's this assumption that I have what you need, but you don't necessarily have anything that I need. And I've been learning a little bit about this even as a pastor in a different way. You know, I got into this because I just love people. I love you. Even if you don't love me, I love you. I love people. I love to help people. I love to hear their stories. I love to hear how God is working in the midst of their journey, and I love listening. And so what I have found that I can sometimes do is the spotlight will just stay on you then. And what can happen, unbeknownst to me, is that you may begin to feel like, well, you always have need, and maybe, just maybe, I'm someone who doesn't have any needs at all. And it creates this kind of relationship that isn't true, but it's also unhealthy. I've actually been learning to do a better job of when I pray for someone, maybe if I'm struggling too, to say, hey, would you pray for me about that thing too? Because man, I'm not much further along than you are, and I have some needs over here that I would love for you to speak into as well. And then we begin to see one another as, and that's that Greek word for fellowship with each other, that's koinonia. That's I'm going to withdraw from you and I'm going to deposit. You're going to withdraw from me and you're going to deposit. And in that we experience this strength from one another. And that's when we reach out as someone who can reach back to us instead of reaching down to someone. You know, it's interesting, that Thanksgiving feast that we attempted, it wasn't a total and complete bust. And in fact, when we were cleaning up that afternoon and we had started to package up most of the food, we had a church office location that was in a different spot, but our next door neighbor then literally stumbled on over into our front yard. And that neighbor was high on something, and she just kind of stumbled and sat down in the yard, and my friend Robin ended up seeing her there in the front yard. And that's Darlene and Robin right there. And what happened that afternoon was incredibly powerful and instructive, not only for me, but I think maybe for us as well. Because long after we fed Darlene a meal, Robin continued to pursue a relationship. And she began to see that this is a person, not a project, and she didn't have the necessary paperwork even to get a job, and so she did the hard work of following up and making sure she had the documentation so that then she could get a job, so that she could be seen as a person who could contribute. She could make some money, and again, to be elevated out of this impoverished state. She took her to get clean and saw it through, and then we began to see that there's this deeper need that our friend Darlene had, a spiritual need, a Jesus need, because Jesus is the one who rescues. And so Darlene gave her life to Christ, and we actually baptized her here in our big dunking booth, and it was beautiful. It's just a few months before Darlene passed away. What a gift. And that's how God invites us to love, not to see people as projects. This is a person. That's how Robin always saw Darlene. She's not the only one in our community that's been loving on people that have needs. And we are leaning into this as a church. We are learning as much as we can. We're beginning to partner with some folks like the Samaritan Center and a couple of churches, including OUMC, Ooltewah United Methodist Church, and the Cleveland Emergency Shelter, trying to do our best to see how we can best help in ways that are restorative. But I scanned our people and just got to know a couple folks that have actually been doing this. And this is instructive, I think, for us to hear from those who have been doing it and who are doing it so that we can begin to see, well, what might this look like for me? So I'm going to invite my friends Matt Rogers and Eddie and Lisa Capehart on up to share a little bit more about what God is doing through them in this journey. So could you give them some love as they come on up here? You know, it was interesting as I began to meet with and talk with my friends here, and I got lunch here with Eddie this week, and I asked Eddie this question that I'm going to ask. I was like, man, so what in the world got you to the point where you knew that you needed to do something about what you see around us, the poverty and the brokenness? And I'll let him share. What did you tell me, Eddie?
Well, actually, Lisa started it.
Right. So Eddie said it actually wasn't me; it was my wife. And we have a lot of us men here that have been inspired and encouraged by our. Can I get a big amen, men? Married to women. God often uses our wives to get us to a point where we are seeing what he has for us. So then I'll ask you, Lisa, what was it that God birthed in your heart that began to do something in you to where you actually took action in caring for those who have needs?
It started when I was a kid, before I ever come to know Christ. I always had a heart for people less fortunate, and I would always find somebody to bring home that needed some dinner or a place to stay. And at the age of 31, I accepted Christ, and he had told me that I was going to go to the mission field. So I come home and shared that with Eddie, and he looked at me with that crazy look, like I was crazy. And it did take some time, and we've done a lot of international mission trips, and circumstances changed in our life, and it was just making it more difficult to get away for that extended period of time. And I was praying one day because I'm like, God, did I hear you right? And he gave me Isaiah 61 that says, the sovereign spirit of the Lord was on me. He had anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. And he said, it's just going to look a little different than what you've been doing. And we got involved with the Mustard Tree Ministries and serving the poor there.
I love it. And you drag your husband along with you.
Drag my husband.
Now, Matt, tell me, you have a full-time job, you've got a lawn business on the side, busy guy, dad, husband, all that kind of stuff. Tell me more about what got you started in the ministry that you've been doing for the last year and a half with Cleveland Emergency Shelter.
I think I was blessed with two really good parents. You know, they both have given so much. My dad has helped build several different churches that we attended when we were kids, and just always giving his time. That's probably why I run sound all the time here. Mom, she doesn't know a stranger, and she loves everybody. I mean, she housed people. She always had people at our house helping the elderly. Just a tremendous example. And I think, you know, we've seen the baby dedications today, and just how important a good example you are to your own children. Yeah. And she gave me that. So I think it's just kind of born and bred in me. And because of her and him, I really enjoy helping. So, yeah.
It's interesting how many of us have seen others who we love and respect who have inspired this. I'll say, too, that conversely, I was on the opposite end of the spectrum. It was actually my son, Joshua, who has always had a heart for the poor. And it wasn't his very pious father that got him interested. It was actually he who had a passion for it, who got me to the point where we got connected. And so, and Jesus even said, like, look at the kids. You know, they're the ones that actually get it. So not only is it parents sometimes, but it's our kids who have these hearts for folks. So tell me, Matt, in your journey, what have you learned as you've been serving over the last 12 to 18 months about what it looks like to really empower the poor and put into practice some of the things we've been talking about this morning?
So it's been humbling, and it's actually really fun to be humbled, to be able to be at a humble state and help others in that frame of mind, so you don't feel, you know, privileged or I got it all together. You're just helping, and I feel on the same playing field with most of the people that we help, and so it's great to be humbled, and that's where my heart is with this thing. Is I kind of feel a little bit more like Christ, who came to serve and to help others. So I feel like I'm in the right spot there. Yeah. That's what I really enjoy about doing this. So,
Eddie, what about you, man? You guys have been doing this for a little while. What have you learned? You know, first you got drugged by your wife, and then God began to birth something in your heart and use you. So what have you learned in your journey?
Like Matt said, it's a humbling experience. It's just taught me a different kind of love, maybe closer to the kind of love that Christ has for us. The homeless people that we serve, and the people in Peru and Honduras that we've served, people a lot of times avoid the impoverished, the poor people, and they're actually some of the most loving, caring people. They've just had circumstances that came into their life, like we all have, and they maybe could not have dealt with it, or didn't have the support, or didn't have their faith in Christ that we have.
Yeah. So you've learned that you have a lot more in common than maybe you originally thought.
Sure.
And that you could benefit from them as well. Well, I'm interested, and anyone can answer, how have these experiences served to change you in ways that are important? You mentioned that. What else or how have you are now different because of the experiences you've had in serving and loving on people who have these kinds of needs?
I look at people differently now. My heart has changed towards other people.
How so? Tell us.
I look at the people we serve. They're no different than I am. I probably had a different attitude towards that. Maybe thinking I was better than. And you get to know them, and they just want to be loved on, and they want to tell you about their life. And I had a prayer. I prayed, God, give me your eyes. There was a song, Brandon Heath, give me your eyes for just 1 second. And that was my prayer. I want to see people the way you see people. Yeah. I want to love on people the way you would love on people.
And it's interesting as you build relationships with people, you know, the superficial assumptions that we make sometimes are confronted by these stories. And it sounds like that's been the case for you. Yeah. What about you, Matt? How are you different because of this?
So to be able to hopefully give somebody worth, that they're worth something. You mentioned the Good Samaritan, and And you wonder about the first two that walk past, whether or not they've seen them. I mean, we drive past the cardboard, and it's changing my heart. I'm in that process, and do I look at them? And so the guy who actually helped this Samaritan, or the Samaritan that helped him, he's seen him. And that gave that guy value. It gave him worth. And so I'm seeing people and hopefully encouraging them and giving them worth, holding your hand out to help them. So that makes me know I'm in the right spot. And it's so encouraging. And I think it encourages others to want to do this with me. So,
That's right. Yeah. Awesome. Hey, would you thank our friends for sharing just a little bit of their story? So I think that was so significant to see people the way that God sees people. I want to invite you to stand up, and I'm just going to pray as we as a church are growing into this, that it begins with a heart that God has given us that is able to look at the needs of others, and then gives us eyes to see people the way that God sees them. Aren't you glad that God sees us differently even than we see ourselves? And it begins with noticing some things in some people, and then actually having the courage to maybe do something about what we see. As God directs, being bold, being courageous, being faithful. So I'm going to pray for us, and then